I think some of this comes with how long you've been playing the game. I think it's very fair to say that someone who is on day one has only played for 10 or less hours. It's probably going to go into the battle phase and just see the animations and watch the VFX and watch the bright lights and numbers go up, right? And then that's fine, because that's fun. There's a reason Vegas and slot machines are successful. People like to see numbers go up and bright lights, right?
Huge. Yeah,
numbers go up.
Welcome to White Flag.
Welcome to another Dev Talk episode where we talk to game devs about the process of making and creating and designing games, their games specifically. Some admin stuff quickly. Subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/wideflank. Support the pod. You also get an exclusive new GLHF episode per month. That's our new thing that we're doing. Like, subscribe, rate us 5 bajillion stars, all that stuff that every podcast says. Moving on. On this episode, we spoke with Andrew Parnell from Million Dreams Games about their new game, Once Upon a Galaxy.
Yeah, and Once Upon a Galaxy, let's tell you a little bit about it. It's very much a video game, and it's designed as a video game and with those design considerations in place. But it's at the same time, it's very much in the lineage of Magic the Gathering. So it's a bit of a card game. And if you're familiar with Hearthstone, it's also in that realm as well. But Alon's more familiar with Hearthstone than I am, though. So, Alon?
We talked about it with Andrew, but it's kind of an auto battler, but they say card battler or collectible card auto battler, or
we figured out that it's a battle royale game. So it's a battle royale, auto battler, battle royale, card battler, collectible auto. But see, in the conversation with Parney, even he at a certain point was like, yeah, we just had to truncate it to.
Yeah. He's just like, people don't know what we're talking about when we say X, Y, or Z. So now we just say this. And I'm like, okay.
He kept saying that like people thought it was like a tower defense. Like when you say auto battler to people.
They thought it was a tower defense game.
Right. Which speaks to, I'm seizing upon like the divide between tabletop games and video games. But I think that reflects that like you say auto battler to someone that mostly comes from like the Wizards of the Coast tabletop realm, and they're like, tower defense? Like, they don't know.
Yeah, you were asking me, you were like, how do you win? And I was like, oh, you're just the last one standing. And that's when I realized, like, oh, it's a battle royale. I just have played so many auto battlers, like TFT or Battlegrounds or whatever, that I'm just like, I know that it's a battle royale instinctively, but I haven't said the words out loud. But yeah, it's fun.
It's super fun. It's like super accessible. And like the stuff we're talking about is like part of the design consideration of the game. Trying to communicate this super complex game to a player base that like maybe doesn't have experience with it. And so a lot of the conversation is about building out like how to make the first hour of the game accessible and how to keep people playing and how much information to provide to the player and like when to provide that information.
Also,
and things
it's
like
on mobile. We didn't even mention that. This is a mobile game. I think first ever mobile game in Wide Flank history, which just crystallizes all of these decisions of like information on a screen because it's a really narrow, small screen. There's only room for this much. And like onboarding, you're competing against games that like or Candy Crush that play in 30 seconds and give you dopamine hits like left, right, center. Like that's what you're competing with in that space. So, we spoke about a lot of that. We spoke about sort of the onboarding is like one side of it, like almost the accessibility. And then the other side of it is like, but there's also all this depth and it's kind of hard to be really good at these games. And it's actually very complex.
Yeah, it's like the spectrum from accessibility to mastery, which I think like a lot of the video games and tabletop, a lot of games like are dealing with that spectrum. So it was a sick conversation. Parney's the best.
Rocks.
Yeah.
Shout out to Parney. And if anyone's familiar with Storybook Brawl, came up a few times. It was there. A lot of the people who worked on Once Upon a Galaxy worked on that game, which, no longer exists, but was kind of competing with Battlegrounds. I think at the time when it came out, it was popular in this world, so a lot of people might be familiar. And yeah, they're in open beta now, so you can just play it and shred it. And we've been playing it.
Yeah, maybe that's like the thing to land on is like, you could just download this game right now and play it. Go download Once Upon a Galaxy. See what you think, Wide Flank listener. Don't take it from us. Take it from yourself, but also take it from Parney.
It sort of sounds like we're sponsored. We're very much not sponsored.
No.
Parney just rocks.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to talk to him. But, you know, that's what Dev Talks are all about, is like we just try and have interesting combos about the game or series of games or whatever that someone is working on, really.
Yeah. And like Parney's passion, I'd say this to Parney straight up on the episode. Like, your passion for card games really shines through. Which, like, you know,
the crew that worked on Once Upon a Galaxy are very much like former Magic pros who were touring the countries, playing tournaments. In Parney's case, hosting tournaments, casting tournaments, streaming tournaments that are like hardcore card game Magic players, you know?
Yeah, and I'm getting all geeked up because, like, in the conversation, that was one of the more fascinating things to me, is like Parney talking about the process of organizing competitive tournaments, but we barely talk about that. We mostly are talking about like the design of Once Upon a Galaxy. Like, that's
yeah.
It's an ongoing thing. It's a game that's in ongoing development. There's a roadmap for release within the next like 6 months.
I think we've taken enough of your time. Let's do the interview. Let's go to the Dev Talk.
Take it away, Parney.
Today, Sean and I are joined by Andrew Parnell, executive producer at Million Dreams, and today we're talking about Once Upon a Galaxy, their new card battler. Hi, Andrew. We're so happy to have you on.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Pretty good. So, Andrew, how would you describe Once Upon a Galaxy?
Ooh, how would I describe Once Upon a Galaxy? Well, I would say that it's an exciting new card battler. And you caught me off guard on the first question. How would I describe it?
Sure. Exciting.
Exciting. Yeah, I guess let me go that way. I would describe it with a bunch of different adjectives. I would say that it's fun, it's fast, it's exciting. We'll get into this, I'm sure, but one of our design goals was to make big, fancy numbers, crazy things possible, combos, all sorts of things. So it's fast, it's fun, it's easy, and really has that hidden deep strategy for those serious gamers.
Yeah. And card battler, I think, is like where I kind of want to begin, because we were just talking about it before the show started, but card battler, auto battler, like collective card game, like there's so many words that have a lot of meaning and attach it to sort of like other games and other series that people are playing. And you guys seem to have settled on card battler. To me, it's an auto battler. I mean, where do we begin there? I don't even know where to begin there. I think it's an auto battler.
Yeah, it's tough to put an exact in there. Auto battler works fine. That's where we started to define it as well. I think we started to explain that to people, and depending on who the audience was, sometimes people would get a little confused, thinking that if we said auto battler, we meant some sort of tower defense, protect the castle type game. And so when we explain, no, it's cards, it's closer to Magic or Hearthstone, or even Slay the Spire, Marvel Snap. Then people started to get it a little bit more as like, oh, it's card based. And so we said, well, how about a card battler? And when we started to call it a card battler, people started to get less confused. So yeah, I mean, we can call it whatever you want, but whatever helps people understand that you're playing with cards and the battles happen for you.
Cool. Yeah. So it's working out, like the way that you're communicating about the game with people.
Yeah, definitely. And it depends on the audience, right? People who are familiar with auto battlers, with Hearthstone Battlegrounds, you say auto battler, they know what you mean. You go into a local game store and you say that, who's never heard of Hearthstone, and they don't know what an auto battler is. So it depends who you're talking to.
Bunch of like old timers that are like devoted to the like tabletop that are just
for sure.
I mean, that does flow into kind of what I wanted to ask, which is like, do you have an understanding of how much of your audience comes from like a card background as opposed to like, because I think of these auto battler games as very much like a video game form. Like, do you have a sense of what like the ratio of the player base is, or like do you have an ideal type of player in mind? Or
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Let's get into target audience, because we could go for a while on that about what our goal was. We might need to bring in the Storybook Brawl background on this to help inform that.
Okay.
But the team that built this game at Million Dreams Games for Once Upon a Galaxy, it's a lot of previous Magic players, Hearthstone players. We all have a card background. Those are the type of games we love: card games, strategy games. That's really our background. Most of the team previously before this worked at Storybook Brawl, which was another auto battler or card battler that was PC based, and it was a little more focused on strategic depth, and was really popular.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we didn't get it to get full public launch, but it was really popular while it lasted. And there was a lot of lessons we learned from that in order to come and build this game. And I can go through a couple of those because it's really explains this target audience. One of the limitations of Storybook Brawl, I thought, was as popular as it was and as fun as it was definitely not new player friendly. If you hadn't played Magic before, or if you hadn't played Teamfight Tactics, or if you hadn't played Hearthstone Battlegrounds, you kind of see it and you're intimidated by all the decisions and reading all the cards. And so one of the things, I have a side story about that I want to tell in a second, but one of the things we wrote on the whiteboard from day one was it needs to be more new player friendly. It needs to be somebody who can pick it up if they've never played a card game before and at least understand how to play the game. Maybe they don't understand all the strategy. Maybe they don't understand all the depth. Maybe they can't pull off the combos, but they can play the game. They can play the game and have a good time. And that was
can start.
Bullet point number one. They can start. Well, more than start. Can they finish? Can they finish a game without understanding what they're doing? And that was really, really important. And I think
that's a really tough task. I think everyone who's ever made a board game, I'm sure, runs into this. Is like, how do we not have people read for the next 2 hours before actually playing and having fun? Because no one's going to want to play.
And honestly, we validated this. This is one of the things that I think has been really successful. Is when we were at Gen Con about a month ago, we had 6-year-olds, 10-year-olds coming up to the iPads and just playing game after game after game. And some kids would sit there and play for an hour without really reading the cards, without understanding what was happening. But they got the bigger numbers look better, the shinier gems mean better, and things are hitting each other, and I'm winning, so I'm having a good time. And that's where we wanted to start. You got to be able to check that box. And then can we build a lot of depth into the cards under that, where once you understand what the cards do, then can you have a lot of strategic depth and a lot of fun.
It's like this notion of starting it should be accessible, but if you really want to dig into it, you can dig deeper and deeper and things like that. I guess so it's how do you prioritize accessibility in the design of the game? Is it an aesthetic thing? Is it about just showing big numbers fast? How do you guys think about accessibility?
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer that kind of going back to what we wrote on the whiteboard at the beginning, during our brainstorming. So one of them was you have to be able to play the game, without being able to read, right? Without having to need to read every card, you need to be able to finish a game. That was one of them. One of them came from mobile, right? We said you need to be able to play not only mobile, but portrait mode mobile. And we said you need to be able to play the game with one hand. That was one of the things we wrote. So you can call it a couple different ways. It can be you can feed a baby while playing the game, or you can shotgun a beer while playing the game. There's different ways. There's different ways to say it.
That's really hard though, because they're changing the angle. But we don't need to get into that.
But yeah, basically the idea was you need to be able to hold the phone in one hand and play the game like that. So a lot of the design decisions and the user experience and the way the shops work come around that idea of if you can't hold your phone and do this with your thumb and use it with one finger and one hand, we can't have that feature in there. And so that was one of it too. It has to look good on mobile. You have to be able to use it one hand. You have to be able to play it without needing to understand and read all the cards. All of those things were must-haves for the game. And so we set up these boxes, set up these design restraints, right? I think there's some famous phrase like restriction breeds creativity or something like that. We kind of drew ourselves this box and we said we have to be able to do this because this is what users want and this is how we see the users playing the game, and now we need to design within that and be able to make a fun game from that. And I think that some of the more fun and creative things from the game came from that idea that we had to be restrictive on some things.
Right. And a lot of that is also probably I'm assuming geared towards onboarding people also, just who are new to the genre, right? New to an auto battler.
Yeah, so I'll tell that story. So going back to Storybook Brawl, just because that's where a lot of our lessons came from. We used to do these demos. We would go to local game stores, we would go to conventions, and we would demo the game. And just for context, for those who don't know, Storybook Brawl had kind of a similar layout, but it was based on a PC, and there were 7 slots at the top, 7 things you could pick from. or 6 or 7, and then on the board below you had 7 slots that you could put things in, and then you had gold that you could spend as a resource. So something that we saw when we were demoing to people is they would get to the shop in the very first game that they were playing, and they would click on the first card and they would read what it did. They would click on the second card, they would read what it did. They would click on the third card, read what it did, and then they would stop and they would take one of the first 3 cards. And we would say, well, okay, why didn't you read the other cards? And they were like, I didn't want to read that much. Like, I'm not going to read all these cards. And, I get the gist of it. I'm just going to take one of these 3.
Yeah.
And people over and over again, people would stop reading after the third card. And not, there is some advantage to having more options, but we definitely saw that for new players, they didn't want to read 7 cards. They didn't want to read 6 cards. It was 3. And it was always 3. It was, I'm willing to read 3 things. I'm not willing to read more than that. So we thought about that. We said, okay, if that's where new players are going to stop, let's keep it to 3. Let's say you pick one of these 3 and they will read. And we saw that, again, at Gen Con, we validated that a little bit where we demoed to people and sure enough, they read every card, right? Because they read the first 3 and then they stopped and made a decision. There weren't other things on the screen that they were missing because they didn't feel like reading anymore.
I also noticed that there are some cards that have no flavor text or not flavor text, no keywords.
Yeah.
And it's just like that sort of plays along with it, right? I can imagine someone new just hitting, I think it's like the Minotaur or one of those just has no text and you're just like, oh, this is just the 7-4 or whatever, and it makes it easier and quicker. Yeah, that's cool.
And then as you get more into the game, you start to realize strategically those vanilla creatures, as we call them, have higher stats. And so there's kind of a trade-off there that, they serve their purpose as well. One of the other big changes, this just because it flows along similarly with what we're talking about, is gold as a resource. So a lot of games like this will have some sort of resource that you're spending. You're spending gold for cards or spending experience, whatever it might be. One of the things we realized from doing a lot of these new player demos is, let's say you had 7 gold on your second turn. They would buy something. They would have 2 gold left over, and they would say, I just want to battle now. I'm good. And, we would say, well, you still have resources remaining. You still have gold. And they're like, no, but I like what I bought. I don't want to buy anything more. And we're like, well, you can spend 1 gold to refresh the shop. And they're like, no, that's not fun to me. I don't want to do that. And so that was something we noticed, is a lot of new players were like, they understood the resource, but once they had what they wanted, once they made their gameplay choice, they didn't want to have to min-max every resource spend, right?
It sounds kind of similar to the process of reading 3 cards and being like, no, I'm good. I get it. Like, I'm satisfied. I want to play my hand now.
Yeah. So one of the big design decisions we tested a lot and is very different, unique in this game is, instead where there's no currency, there's no resource to buy cards, it's your choice of 1 of 3. Pick 1 of 3, then pick another 1 of 3. So you're not spending gold to buy characters. You're getting a choice, 1 of 3, pick it. So really your resource is like the number of shops, I guess, if you were counting. But that's not really the same thing. So there's never that awkward moment where someone looks at a decision point and says, I have a resource, but I don't want to spend it because that's not what I want to be doing. And now I feel bad that I'm not playing the game right. And we totally got rid of that.
Right. Sure. Yeah. The number of shops does seem like, I've only been playing for, a week or something, but I'm getting better. But the number of shops is definitely like a decision point that I keep running into, where I'm like, I have this, 200 attack, 200 health creature, but I really want to reroll the shop. There's this worse, silver creature in the shop. I'm going to, swap those. And that's kind of where you get into the like, oh, there's advanced strategy. Like, oh, this game is way deeper than it seems it might be. But before that, I wanted to sort of rewind, because I think a lot of our listeners probably don't really even know what an auto battler is. And like it's similar, I think, to a lot of the auto battlers. It's different in ways that you've already pointed out. I think it's also similar to some draft games. And, you mentioned Magic. I'm sure there's some booster drafting in your history or something like that. And so what's an auto battler, and how did you guys like decide to make an auto battler?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but I think you described it well. The genres are basically 2 phases of the game. Phase 1 is drafting or shopping. So if you think about a Magic booster draft, or really any card game that has booster drafting, you have a shop, you have choices, you're drafting things. Honestly, if you're not even a card gamer, if you've ever played fantasy football, it's the same kind of thing, right? You're drafting, you're drafting players, you're drafting characters to your squad. That's at the end of the day, you take away all the design and all the graphics. That's really essentially the same decision point you're making. You're drafting someone to your team. That's kind of phase 1, and then phase 2 is you're playing it out. Now in Magic or Hearthstone or some other games, that is a big piece of the game is who's attacking who's marking damage, what's happening here, and you're making a lot of choices there. The difference in the auto battler genre is we put a lot more of the decision making into the draft side, and then we let the battle fight for you. And so when you hit battle, you're going to see there's some directions on what attacks what in what order, but basically you're going to watch the attack happen, and it's going to go bang, 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 bang. This person KO'd this person, this hit this buff happened, and then the end of your battle. And it takes 60 seconds, right? 30 to 60 seconds. And then you see the result, and you go back to the drafting phase, the shopping phase, and you do that again. And obviously the shopping phase changes as you level up, as you get further into the game. There's better choices, there's more options, there's a lot more depth to it. But that's basically what an auto battler is buy stuff, watch it fight, buy stuff, watch it fight. And I think if someone isn't experienced with it, I would recommend playing different types of auto battlers, because when you describe it, it's the type of game where when you describe it to someone, it sounds like, oh, well, that's less strategic than Magic. That's Magic light. That's a card game light. And it's really not. It's just shifted a lot of the strategy onto more of the drafting side. That's where a lot of your decision points are. And you kind of set up your strategy there. But they're a lot more fun than I think people would think when hearing the description of them.
Yeah, it's like a process that, because Alon and I have been like playing the game with each other a little bit here and there, and like time and time again, because I'm not especially familiar. Like I played Magic a bit when I was a kid. I've like tried auto battlers here and there, but I'll be talking through the process with Alon, and time again I kept saying, I'm like, oh, like the game happens in the draft phase, kind of like that's where your brain is going. And so like a question I have regarding that is like, how do you guys think about the processing of information in the battle phase? Like, could the player possibly parse out what's happening like with like their opponent's hand, or is it more like a vibrant like action moment that's just sort of like thrilling unto itself? Or like is there brain stuff happening during the battle sequence ideally, do you think?
It's a little bit of both, and I think some of this comes with how long you've been playing the game. I think it's very fair to say that someone who is on day one has only played for 10 or less hours, it's probably going to go into the battle phase and just see the animations and watch the VFX and watch the bright lights and numbers go up, right? And then that's fine, because that's fun. There's a reason Vegas and slot machines are successful. People like to see numbers go up and bright lights.
Numbers go up is huge. Yeah,
numbers go up.
If that's sort of your first 1 to 10 hours, that's totally fine. You know, you see the numbers go up, you see the animations, and I think what starts to happen is you start to recognize the arc of the cards. You start to recognize kind of the battle flow, and once you don't have to sort of be thinking about that, then you can start to pick up on like, okay, I know which of their things is going to attack. I know what happens when that card hits. You know, I know that Jack in the Box is going to pop out another character. So I'm watching for that, and I'm either hoping or not hoping that happens. And so I think pretty quickly after you get the main gist of the game, you start to pick up on patterns and see what you're looking for and what you're rooting for and things to happen. And actually, one of the things we did with Galaxy, this is still in beta, so this isn't perfectly polished, but if you touch on anything during the battle, it actually pauses the animation, pauses the fight for you. So
I didn't know that.
If you see something and you're like, oh, what is that thing on my opponent's board? And you click on it, the battle's going to wait for you to unclick before it continues.
That's really cool.
So
I didn't know
it's not
that.
A perfect solution. You still have to be kind of quick with your finger, and some people might not know that. But our idea was like, we don't want you to have to be like, what is that thing? And then you miss the whole battle because you were looking at it. So we do have it pausing anytime you want to read something.
That's great. Yeah, because I've definitely had those fights where like, oh, I'm destroying this lobby, and then there's like a 2000 mimic, and I'm like, what? Like I can't kill it. So now I know, I'll click it and learn about it. That's cool.
Well, not to go too much into design philosophy, but that right there is an important design moment that is fun for the player to experience something they've never seen before.
Yes.
Obviously, we'll probably talk a lot about games being frustrating because that's a common discourse on Discord, but frustrating does not mean bad. So it's important to recognize that what you just described. I'm playing a game, I've played it for 10 hours, then you go up against an opponent who has Mimic or Hercules and just completely stomps you. That's an interesting moment because, it might feel bad, but you're also like, what is that card?
Yeah.
There's so much more I could do that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Which is more how I interpreted it. Because, like, I think everyone sort of has... I have a lot more experience, I think, than Sean with auto battlers. I've played a ton of Battleground, TFT, all those stuff. So, at first, everyone sort of does the same thing, which is, like, the obvious synergies, right? It's just like, oh, this buffs all animal cards, so I'm just going to get animal cards. And, like, you realize over time that +1 health every turn is like not that good. There's only like 12 to 20 turns, and I'm getting a plus 20, and that guy has a 1,000. So like you learn to like be like, okay, there's a lot more powerful things I can be doing. I just need to figure out how to do them.
Yep. Until you come full circle and realize that getting early health bonuses to stabilize your early team helps you be able to take more risks and potentially have more upside. So yeah, there's a lot of depth to it.
That was my early explanation to Sean of like where the strategy comes in. I was like, you need to be stable enough early game and scaling enough late game, and that's like the whole balance. I think of like the auto battle.
Balancing your risk is a huge piece of this game for sure.
Yes.
So it is like a very like time scale, and I'm just gonna riff a little bit. I'm just gonna wildly riff. I'm like, from my understanding of the game thus far, it's like very much like a time scale oriented game. It's a game that's like kind of linear in some ways, and I think like I just want to compliment like the way that the shop functions within that flow. Because like when I was, again, to go back to like me and Alon behind the scenes, me being like, shops, like when I hear shop, I think of like Counter-Strike, I think of MOBAs, I think of that as like a discrete stage at the start of the game or something that you need to be like aware of to just like, oh, I need to go to the shop now. And I think an interesting thing about Once Upon a Galaxy so far is how like the shop is just like, it's a very just like straightforward process. Like you're presented the information that you need, like when you need it, kind of. And I'm trying to think of a question. I don't really have a question. It's more just like an observation, I think, of, I guess it's like, how do you guys think about like the time scale of a given match of the game? Like, are you like trying to process out like that relationship between early game, late game?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that relates to actually one of the other things on the whiteboard from day one that I didn't mention before, but was how long a game should take. So we definitely are designing the game to be roughly around 7 minutes, start to finish. So if you win a game, maybe if you go really long, there's an outlier where you can go a little longer than that, but we want to keep the game fast. For reference, a game of Storybook Brawl took about 25 minutes. A game of Magic takes 40 minutes, right?
Wow.
So it's very different.
Battlegrounds is long.
Battlegrounds is long. Snap is a little quicker. So Marvel Snap is only about 5 minutes, which is good. We kind of want to be about there, maybe a little bit longer. But the idea was that we don't want a play session to be, I'm playing one run and I'm stopping, I'm just done there. We want to get you in, have fun with it, have a good time, and then move on and play another one and play a different captain or try some different cards or try a different strategy. And part of the losing experience as well, and this, I had some personal input on this too, but, being a dad of 3 young kids, I was very frustrated when I sat down to play a game of Magic or play a game of Storybook Brawl, and it said, well, I have to devote 25 minutes to this. And if I get 24 minutes in and then I lose, it's kind of frustrating because it's like, well, that was my gaming time, right? And I got to play one game and I was kind of frustrated with it. Or what happened a lot was it would be like, say it's 11:50 and I'd be like, well, I have 10 minutes here to play something before I need to be somewhere, but I can't start a game of Magic. You can't start a Magic draft when you have 10 minutes, right? But I still want to scratch that itch. So we think it's very, very important to have it be able to say, we don't want time to be a factor where someone says, I don't have time to play a game of Galaxy. You have 5 minutes, you can play a full run, right? You can start to finish.
Totally.
So that's partly just to be able to, on the run, you have your phone with you, you have 5 minutes, you can play. But then also that's part of the run length too, is we have to be really careful to make sure that runs are won or lost within that sort of 7-ish, 10-minute period, because they can't go longer than that, and we did test some early on with longer turns and, some of the things going a little bit later. It definitely impacted the fun when you'd have the top 2 of a lobby go and they play for 20 more turns and it ends up taking 17 minutes. It's like, this isn't as fun. Like I want it to be 7 minutes. I want to move on to the next thing. We get some questions. We don't have to go into the full heart system here, but one of the controversial things we've done is that you always take full damage in the final 2. So whenever you're down to the last 2 people in the lobby, you always take full damage. There's no half damage anymore, which is controversial because it's a little weird to say you have half damage throughout the game except when it's in the finals. But this is part of one of the reasons is it's not quite sudden death, but we want that sudden death feeling of like when you get to the finals head to head against somebody, this is it. All chips on the table. We're not going to go back and forth for 20 rounds. Who's going to win right now? Right. So it's always full damage in the finals. And we made that change. We tested it for a while on people. And I think the game's a lot more fun because of that.
I wanted to rewind a second here and just ask you a simple question that I think we kind of glossed over at the beginning, but what is your role on one?
Yeah,
right, we zoomed right by this. But what is your actual role on Once Upon a Galaxy?
Sure. So
we made this decision. We made it. I don't know. I'm like, wait, what do you do again?
My title is executive producer. I basically work hand in hand with Matt Place, who's our visionary genius president of the company. He's the one who has decades of game design experience. He worked. He's been in won a Magic Pro Tour. He's worked on Hearthstone, done all sorts of various games. Tons of experience there. He's kind of the visionary behind the company and the team. I kind of work hand in hand with him. My role is basically to take his vision and execute it. So I work with the whole art team, the engineering team to build everything, the art team to get all the art descriptions, as well as the design team to make design decisions. And Matt and I together kind of came up with that core game engine, kind of lessons learned from Storybook Brawl, this whiteboard list of what we wanted the game to be, and then kind of help steer the team and steer the game to make sure that it gets done the best it can possibly be.
Cool. Great.
Yep.
I felt like I was kind of interrupting a flowing conversation, but I needed to get it in there.
We needed the baseline of who are you? What do you do?
Yeah,
no worries.
No worries. Yeah, exactly.
But I could touch back on your other question though was about game flow kind of during the game. So for those of you who haven't played, or if it's not clear, the way it works is basically you level up every other turn, every 2 turns. So you start out and you see only commons. And you see that for 2 turns, and then on turn 3, you start to see uncommons, and then on turn 5, you start to see rares, turn 7, you see epics, turn 9, you start to see legendaries, and that 2 turn. We've played with that a little bit. A lot of games do something similar where you get more currency or you can get higher level units. There's different ways to do it, but we played with the 2-turn model, and it seemed pretty good. And that is something we've tweaked along the way, how many turns until you level up, how many turns total, do you go until you knock everybody out of a lobby, or do you go X amount of turns? Which had some advantages, but that version was kind of anticlimactic to just, it's turn 12, you win, game over, regardless of who else was in the lobby. It wasn't super fun. So that was a big piece of it. But yeah, the every 2 turns you level up is how you get those characters. Side story with levels, just because this is interesting, a lot of games do cards by level. So level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Right? If you notice about Once Upon a Galaxy, we don't do that. We do card rarities as sort of things getting better, which is actually a little bit different than how a lot of other games treat rarities. And there was a lot of reasons we tried this experiment, but one of the big ones that we saw goes all the way back to that, what does a new player feel? And one of the things we learned while watching new players and doing a lot of research was that there isn't a visceral gut hit between the number 2 and the number 3, right? If you see a number 2 in your shop and level 3 in your shop, you might understand that the level 3 might be better than the level 2, but it's just a number. And if the level 2 has more stats than the level 3 and the level 3 is smaller, a lot of people were just taking the level 2, right? And even if the level 3 had some cool ability, it was like, well, this one has bigger numbers, so I'm going to take this one. The 2 versus the 3 didn't kind of hit you in your gut. It didn't mean anything. But when you look at the card and you have a big rarity gem that says, this card is a rare, there's something about that draws your attention to it. And it says, okay, there's a 5/5, there's an 8, there's a 5/5 common, there's an 8/8 common, but there's a 2/2 rare. I should probably look at the rare like that. What is this one? Why is this one have this bright blue gem? Right. Even though it's a 2/2, I should at least click on this and read what it does, right? If you're opening a pack of Pokemon cards, I should be taking the rare, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. So we tested shifting this to rarities instead of levels to get that gut feel of you see a shop, you see 3 things, I want that shiny legendary one, right? And then at least you can reason out if you want to or not, but we want you to be drawn to the higher level things, and a 3 versus a 2 or a 5 versus a 4 just didn't do that.
Yeah. I have 2 follow-up questions there because, well, the first one is every auto battler I've ever played or even draft games, you don't have like a deck. Everyone's pulling from the same pool of cards or pool of units. So I'm curious about how you decided to have a deck and how does that really work? It's like I'm pulling from my own pool of cards. I haven't really grasped how that works. And then the other thing is you were just talking about the rarity system. It's interesting because like you're communicating with the players, right? Like this is more rare. You should take a look at this. But at the same time, you have to have like bad rares to make the good rares good, if that makes sense, right? Like you kind of need to have like some bad cards or like cards that like don't do that much in order for like the other ones to like feel good and like, oh my God, I stumbled on this amazing card, right? So Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Mark Rosewater has a very famous podcast episode on his Drive to Work podcast called "Why We Design Bad Cards." I think there's an article about that too. I would recommend everybody listen to that podcast. Read that article. I'm sure Mark Rosewater can explain it better than I do.
For sure.
I wouldn't necessarily say as we're designing bad cards as much as different cards serve different roles. So I'll give one example. There's a rare in the game called Ace of Hearts, and what Ace of Hearts says is basically, if you're missing 2 hearts, then I'm golden in your shop. And it's kind of got low stats. It doesn't really do a lot. And so most of the time when you see Ace of Hearts, it's not going to be a good card, right? So quote unquote bad card as you would call it there, right? Most of the time you see that's not going to be good. But it serves a purpose, which is some players react differently to losing hearts, right? And one of the things we want to put in is you could say, okay, if you are missing 2 hearts, if you are getting beat in the early game, if you're taking 2 high risky plays at the early game, and maybe that's your play style or something, having a card that says, oh, you're losing hearts early, let me give you a catch up here. Let me give you some big stats and a treasure to help you catch up here if that's something you care about. But if players are more conservative or planned out their turns more, they don't really need that card. So that serves a specific purpose of a type of player that, different players might treat that card differently.
Totally.
Then obviously there's what they call build arounds, where some cards are only for, Fey decks, where it says if you're not doing spells or if you're not doing Fey buffs, then, you're really not interested in this. But if you are, it's an amazing card.
Right.
Yeah.
And then can you talk about the deck and how that works?
Yeah. We can talk about this for a while.
Okay.
Most auto battlers do not have the concept of a deck or a collection.
Yeah.
Right. That's something else that we wanted to experiment with. Going back to the fun angle, people like collecting things. Opening booster packs is fun, right? I think, not to get too much on a soapbox, but I think the way that games and mobile games have gone over the last decade has basically kind of tricked people into, hey, loot boxes are evil because a lot of people coded them that way. But really the idea of opening a booster pack all the way back to baseball cards and Pokemon cards, that's a fun experience, and we want that to be a fun experience. It's only a bad experience if you write it that way. But we think there's something really fun about opening packs. So we wanted to build that as part of our game, which is like, can we have the auto battler pool of picking cards, but you also have some of the enjoyment of opening new cards and getting to play with strategies you've never played with before. And hopefully the idea would be that we can be very generous with these packs. And I think right now it's, if you even get in the top 3 of 6, so if you just go above 50%, you get to open packs. So it's not like we're trying to put them somewhere where you have to pay a ton of money to get them. It's, you're going to open packs all the time is what we're hoping.
All the time,
right?
yeah.
And that grows your collection. And how the collection works, it's a little complicated, but I'll kind of walk through it. So there is a shared pool of cards that everybody sees all the time in every game. For people who played Magic before, think of that as like your core set. That's your core set of cards. Everybody's going to see them all the time. Everybody has them. They're the basic cards in the game. Then there's a pool of collectible cards, which are only available in packs, which are only available if you've collected them. And again, most people will collect a lot of these. It's not like you have to go spend money to buy these. It's just like you also have this collectible pool of things you've unlocked. And maybe, instead of pack deck, it might make more sense to think of like unlocking them for your captain, right? You're unlocking these cards to use because it's a little bit more like that.
Right.
So these are some more, captain specific cards, or maybe more complicated cards than most, early users would understand, but they have something fun about them that would be really interesting. Or they're unique cards that are only serve one's particular purpose that we put in collectibles so that you can choose to play them if you want. And the way it works is at the very start of your game, you have the shared pool everybody has, and then you choose 12 additional cards to shuffle in along with your pool. So you're still going to see all the shared pool just like everybody else, but now you get to customize your game with 12 additional cards that you want. So if you're somebody that really likes playing mages and spells, and that's all you want is you just want to play spells every game, you can change all your decks to unlock all the mages and unlock all the spells, and then go into the game and you shuffle in 12 more spell cards or 12 more mages into there. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to guarantee to see those cards. It's going to be it's going to be random, just like everything else in there, but you are sculpting the pool of cards you're going to see. You're sculpting your shops to see cards that you want to see more, whether that's more spells or more dragons. And you can do it per captain. So if you have Jack Sparrow, who says he doubles your hunt abilities, then you want to put more pirates in that deck. If you have somebody that cares about treasures, you want to put more dragons in that deck. So there's a lot of strategy you can do there, as well as just customizing for your play style. But that's essentially how the unlocks and the decks work.
Cool. Yeah, I love it.
Sure. So it is like this like broader learning process kind of, because like I think the thing that hit me as, again, like I'm trying to own my role as the novice to this world kind of, that it's like these things only become relevant as someone plays the game more and more, and like the information is like steadily communicated to the player. And I'm taking the conversation in a slightly different direction just for a moment, because like there was something I was thinking about, which is this game and its ilk, as far as I understand it, like is very much like number go up, like that's exciting. But at the same time, it seems like these games are, and this game specifically, is so much about like other types of information, like what we were talking about earlier in terms of like there's not that big of a difference between 2 and 3, so like you don't process it out. And I guess like the question then is, how do y'all make decisions about like it's like the importance of aesthetic information in the game? Because I'm talking about 3 different types of information right now. I'm talking about like the sheer numbers and the math of it. I'm talking about the effects of the cards and like the synergies that come out of that. But then I'm also talking about like the aesthetics of the game itself, with like marking different cards with different colors as essentially an aesthetic choice because it like hits a deeper button. So I guess the question is, like how do y'all think about the importance of aesthetics in your game?
Yeah, it's very important. Aesthetics are a huge part of it. I'll answer that one first, and then we can talk about numbers in a little bit. But yeah, and I think there's an interesting thing here. I try to explain this to people. I've talked about this before, but every piece of information you add to the screen, every information that someone needs to do, it's not plus one piece of information. It's actually exponential, because what's happening is it's more like a grid. If you picture like an X and Y axis, if I add something else to the screen, that means I not only need to think about that piece of information, but now I need to also think about how that piece of information interacts with all the other pieces of information I learned. So if you have 2 things on the screen and then you add a third, you're not adding one piece of information, you're adding 3, but then also how does 3 impact 1 and how does 3 impact 2? So every single thing you add to the screen, you have to be very, very strict about what puts on there. And I know a lot of our early beta testers, who are very much the gamer crowd, really want a lot of information. Things like, we've gotten tons of feedback about like, well, I want to be able to see a notebook of all the buffs that I've ever gotten on each character, and why doesn't it show that off to the side? And it's like, well, it's a lot of information for a new player to process, and they can play the game without that, right? And then, can you just put an icon on this? Or, well, then I need to learn what the icon is. And then it's, okay, well, can we also do this and this and this? And every piece of information is complex. That's a lot of things you need to remember. Who I'm fighting in the battle. That's a sensitive one. It's tough because we want to be able to sell this idea that you're playing in a lobby with 5 other people. It's 6 of you playing a game at the same time. We haven't talked about async yet, but
I need to talk about that.
Even in async mode, it's you versus 5 other previous runs. So it's still a lobby of 6 people. How much information about the lobby do we share on the screen at a time? Because that is somewhat relevant. It's important to make you feel like you're playing as part of a lobby. But while I'm shopping, if I have to be parsing what all other 5 players are doing and what health they're at and what they bought and what I saw last time, that's way too much information for a new player to process. And maybe a very experienced player can handle that information. But honestly, you don't want to put something level 1 on the screen that you need to have played 500 hours in order to understand. That's poor design right there. Right.
Yeah.
So you need to be really restrictive with, like, if something goes on the main screen and it's something that I can see and process, it has to be really, really important that you feel like you have to process there. One of the fun ones that I think we still haven't figured out, just peek behind the curtain because we're still in beta, is there's a little icon in the top left of the screen when you're playing. And basically what this means is we needed an ability for, if you have something in the shop that you want to buy, you want to recruit it, but you don't have space for it on your board, you can drag that character over to the top left. And what happens is you recruit it, you get all the recruit effects, it turns silver, it turns gold, you get your free shop, you get your treasure, you get your triggers, whatever it might be. You still get all those things, but it just doesn't go on your board. Very important mechanic to have in the game, because as you get deeper into it, a lot of your decisions are going to be, I want to buy this, I want to get it, but I don't want to put it on my board. You need that space.
I'm happy with my board.
How to communicate what that space does is very difficult. And the interesting thing is, how important is it is an interesting question, because it's essential to have that as part of the game. In order for the game engine to work, you have to be able to buy stuff from the shop. and you not play it on your board. But can a player play? How many hours can a player play without understanding that that's what that slot did and still be having fun? You know, a lot of people say, oh, I played 70 hours without realizing that. And it's interesting when players give you feedback, because somebody might say, hey, this is
we haven't realized.
Yeah, there you go.
I thought it was like pure flush. Like I thought it was just pure.
Yeah, I thought it was a reroll or something.
Yeah, something like that.
So I don't think we're communicating it the best way. To be clear, I think we need to improve it. But the interesting challenge there is people will say, I played 75 hours without realizing that was a thing. You need to communicate that better. Which is true, but also it's interesting. Well, at the same time, you played 75 hours. So what happened? You understand what that slot did. So
how problematic.
It's interesting, right? How problematic was it? Which is those are kind of the questions us as game designers have to keep in mind, is like, that is true, but also we need to understand the reality of people are playing the game differently. And if somebody plays 75 hours without knowing that's what that button did, there's something good about that too. So that one, I think we need to find the right balance for it. It needs to be communicated a little better. Maybe it needs to be part of the new player experience when you first get, oh, this is, by the way, if you get something here, you can still recruit this. I think that's a good solution for it, but we also don't want to call so much attention to this button. Hey, everybody, look at this button, when it's like, but you can play 100 hours of the game without using it. So we don't really want to call too much attention to it either. So,
and like you said, it's exponential. Like you could put it in the tutorial, but then, you know, someone brand new to the genre is like, wait, should I put it here or there? Or, you know, I don't know what to do with this.
How many people are not going to play the game because that's going to make the tutorial 30 seconds too long, and they're going to be like, no, that was, you know, what's the straw that breaks the camel's back? That was the one thing that I'm like, I had you until then. Now I'm confused. I don't want to think this much. I want to play this game.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So, or do you do it 15 minutes into the game? You know, there's a lot of options.
Right. I want to talk about the async because that is very new to me. I kind of just assumed I was playing against bots. Like I'm lurking in the Discord, and if someone posts a code to join a lobby, I'm like, oh, okay, I get to play against real people now instead of bots. But now I'm learning that there's something else. Can you explain what async is and how that works?
Yeah, so I answered a couple different ways. You're not really playing against bots, although asterisk, when you play your first bronze like intro tutorial, you are playing against pre-made boards there. So let's just say you played for an hour. You're past your first 10 games because those are on Rails. But once you get past the on Rails portion, you're not playing against bots. You're not playing against AI. You're playing against real people. So essentially what that means is you click a start, you play a game. Once you hit that button, what we will do is we'll say, okay, we have saved every run, every decision that any previous player has ever made. We've saved it all. So you did 5 games yesterday. We have a record, a log of basically every character you took, every board you played during your run yesterday and what place you finished in.
Yeah.
So think of that. I mean, we have millions of runs in the database.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you hit play, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, well, let's find 5 players that are similar skill level to you, or when they were a similar skill level to you. And then we'll basically load up their other runs against you, and you will play a lobby against those 5 people.
That's awesome.
So when you go into turn 1, we're going to take, well, what did Joe do on turn 1? What did Andrew do on turn 1? What did Sam do on turn 1? And then that's the lobby. That's what you're going to play against. And you're going to play against Sam's turn 1 from yesterday. And then your turn 2. Okay, well, what did Sam do on his turn 2? What did Joe do on his turn 2? And then you're going to keep doing that. And basically, you're playing against real people. It's just people who've played in the past.
I mean, I love it. It makes so much sense. It's so much more appealing to me than actual bots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, of course, we also have playing against real people. Right now, that's just like private lobbies. Think like Among Us or Jackbox games, something like that, where it's just, join in, grab your friends, type in a code, and play against real people, which is really fun. But eventually, we will very likely have live matchmaking where it's join a queue, and when 5 other people join, you play. Part of the difficulty with that is that there's two big problems with that. Again, lessons we learned from previous games. But one problem is there's a player base issue with that. So as you're in beta, we're trying to use beta to learn, right? We're testing different things, testing different cards, testing mechanics. That's why you do a beta. But we're trying to keep the player base kind of relatively manageable that we're trying to do. When you're trying to do that and test specific things, having a live matchmaking queue can turn people off. If I hit the play button and I have to wait 5 minutes to get 5 other people, this game isn't full. I don't really want to play this when that's not our focus right now. So it can be distracting. So that's why we don't have that right now. And then 2, there's also matchmaking is really important. Something we struggled with at Storybook Brawl was we didn't have the best matchmaking. So you would come in as a new player, you've played for 2 hours, you're still trying to learn how many turns there are in the game, what the cards do. You'd hit play and you'd be faced up against the world champion. and you would just get absolutely steamrolled, right? And it was like, well, this is not fun. I just lost.
That's not
I
good.
just finished 8th 5 times in a row. This isn't fun, you know? And so there, you have to have pretty good matchmaking for that. And we have some basic matchmaking in there, even for async boards, but you need to have good matchmaking to make sure that, and it's not about manipulating people's runs or win percentages, but it's about like, if you win way too easily, it's not fun. If you get steamrolled or get 6 games in a row, it's not fun. So we got to find that balance of like, you want games to be competitive, but you want to play against people your skill level, right? You don't really want to go up and pick up basketball outside with, you know, 5 NBA players. You'd be like, I can't even put up a shot. Like, this isn't enjoyable.
Yeah. So to like shift the conversation a little bit, like we've most of this show so far has been just diving into the nitty gritty of the game design as such, and your ideas about the game in this. And we already had to do a pit stop of like, wait, who are you? What do you do on the game? But I want to do another like you-centric pit stop of like. Tell us about like your path into first, like what drew you to games like when you were younger, but then like as you got older, like how did you get into like the more professional adult, not the right word for it, but like how did you get into working in games?
Yeah, my story is probably somewhat unique, or maybe not, but I'll go a little bit backwards. It's kind of funny. I don't have a ton of specific experience in the game industry. So after leaving college, I went into consulting. I basically did IT data consulting for a long time. I ran a data analytics company for 10 years, a startup that I had run out of Chicago, and did that for a while, for over a decade. And then basically what started happening was I have a passion for organizing events and running tournaments. And I did some streaming back in my day, and still do streaming from time to time. But I'm really big about tournaments are fun, and I'm good at organizing them. So rewind back several years when this team was starting to do Storybook Brawl and putting it together, and they were in their beta, I kind of went up to them, and, a bunch of them I had known from Magic, and, we're just kind of friends, although they lived in the other part of the country. And I said, yeah, this game is fun. I love being a beta tester, but I think these could make for really fun events. And I have some ideas about how to organize some tournaments.
Whoa.
And so the leadership at Storybook Brawl said, sure, let's run some tournaments, go nuts, do what you want to do. And myself and a couple of people that I worked with just put together, honestly, it was just an amazing tournament series. They were just really, really cool how we did these tournaments, and they totally took off, and they were super popular. And then when that game got bought and we got some funding, it was just like we were doing these huge tournaments and world championship events and traveling people, and it was just absolutely went crazy, and they're really fun. So because of that, when Storybook Brawl did get funding, the leadership there basically looked at the success that the tournaments were having, and were like, hey, we kind of want to bring you on full time. And, it just kind of worked on in my life. And I was like, well, I'm kind of wrapping up my data analytics company, and you guys are just kind of taking off. Let me just hop over, and I'll just enter into leadership on this team. And it just worked out really well. I stepped right in and hit the ground running, and just kind of really took Storybook Brawl by the reins and helped drive a lot of events and did a lot of cool stuff with that game. And it was really fun, so much so that obviously as soon as that track ended, it was no question that, the owners of that and myself, we were like, yep, this ended. We're going to work together, and I'm going to be in from day zero, because this is, because of kind of my passion for it, and got along really well with the leadership there. So, so that was kind of my first foray into that. Although it's funny though, looking back in hindsight, now that I am in the game industry, and, phone calls with my brother about what I'm working on, all these memories come flooding back to me about how my brother and I would just like print off we would draw cards, our own card games. We would take these board games and be like, well, these rules don't make sense. And we would print up our own rules, or we would print out cards. We would design our card games, and we would just cut out cards with, paper, and we would just play all these games. And we must have done that hundreds of times. And it never really crossed my brain. But some of this stuff, go into a meeting and do something, and I'll like, oh, I've been doing this since I was like 6. Like, of course I have. It makes total sense. Like, I know this.
You have that designer's passion in your heart,
instinct and passion.
So I've been doing game design since I was a kid, but just professionally, the last 4 or 5 years.
So I'm gathering that I think a lot of those sort of aspirations for Once Upon a Galaxy are similar to what they were for Storybook Brawl. You see this as a competitive game with a competitive scene and a world championship and Twitch tournaments and all that stuff. I'm curious, like, first of all, if that's true, and then secondly, like, how does one think about making a game watchable? Because I've always thought that, like, as a big Hearthstone player and enjoyer, I've always said it is like the best Twitch game. It's slow enough. It's turn-based. You have all the information that the player has. You can see their hand, and like you don't know what's coming from the opponent, just like they are. Like it's got all that. So how did that go?
Yeah, how many hours you have to talk about a manifesto on streaming on event coverage? But yeah, I'll answer the first one. Yeah, we definitely want to have competitive play. Obviously, I always say, like, you can all hold me back for so long before I'm just gonna do these tournaments because I have so many ideas for it. But I am learning patience from that. I think something we learned from Story for All, along with all this, is the competitive driving scene, the tournament series, the coverage. It's a very good tool, and it's very strong at building community. But what it's best at is strengthening that core group, that inside group, that most competitive group, that strategic group who like the game on a competitive level and want to play it for thousands of hours. It makes them stronger and more committed. That's the goal for it.
Yeah.
What tournaments are less necessarily effective at is bringing in the person who plays Candy Crush on their phone on their way to work and would play card games if there were any good ones, but hasn't really been introduced to it. Or maybe somebody who plays Commander or Tabletop Magic and likes card games, but doesn't really want to get into that depth. They just kind of want to play games with their friends, right? Those people aren't going to tune into Twitch and watch your world championship of your competitive card game. So it's a little bit of a balance. If you focus too much on that, especially too early, then all you're doing is saying, we're going to spend all of our energy on this subset, this 20% subset of our community, and we're going to make it all about them, which is great for them. But you also can't ignore the other 80% of your audience who isn't interested in that. So it's a very delicate balance of, how to serve both at the same time. And you got to kind of toe that line of giving those competitive opportunities, giving those leaderboards, giving those tournaments, while also making the game focused on the 80% of people who just want to play it for fun.
Are you especially concerned with like converting that 80%? Of getting real, it's a real businessy way to frame it. But are you like concerned with converting that 80% to that 20%, or is that sort of like static?
Not really. I think there's room for all of it. I wouldn't necessarily say worried about converting it. One success metric we've seen very positive since like the 2 months that we've been in open beta is that our user retention numbers are very, very high. Which is basically a measure of the stickiness. How much do people hit the play again button? How much do people come back the next day? Very, very high numbers, astronomically high relative to a lot of other games, especially mobile games, which shows something about people like to come back and keep playing. And that's really a success metric for us, is if people were to try the game, we are very confident that they would want to keep playing it, and it's fun for them. They can keep playing. One of the things I wrote on the whiteboard the other day was, can we be the best play again game on your phone that exists? Just like or do you want to keep playing? Do you want to hit the play again button? Can we just naturally be the best play again button on the market?
That like just one more round,
that just
kind
one
of
more
feeling.
Yeah, and not in a sketchy way. I think a lot of games, and this is me getting on my pedestal a little bit, but like I think a lot of mobile games especially do this in the wrong way, where they take a game that isn't fun and they try to manufacture that stickiness out of fakeness. Whereas we're going the true opposite way. We're like, we're not going to try to trick people into playing the game or play more. We're not putting timers on it that say, oh, you have to come back in this amount of time, or you have to jam this. None of that. We want the stickiness because it's fun, because you want to just want to play the game. That's really where we feel, ethically about the game. That's what we want to try to build. And I think you can. I believe there's room to just have an actual fun strategic mobile game, because sorry, I'm going to tangent for a second here.
Go for it.
On mobile,
go off.
When you hear the word mobile game, a lot of people think about that negatively. And the reason why is that apart from maybe Marvel Snap, we'll put Marvel Snap aside because I think they're very successful. I think the game is great.
Yeah.
Other than Marvel Snap, you have two types of games on your phone. You have games that were designed for console or PC that have a crappy port to a mobile device, and you have to turn it sideways and you have to use a fake joystick and try to play. And it's like, this clearly doesn't work on mobile, but we're going to make you do it anyway. Or you have games that were designed for the phone and are just terrible and are just trying to got you with everything they do, right? And it's just like, this isn't fun. They're just trying to trick me to maximize and milk every second out of me. That's really what exists right now. And so our belief is that we can be something along the lines of Marvel Snap and a few others, where it's like, no, this is a game that's designed for the phone, but because that's fun and because people are on their phones now, and it can actually be the drafting magic on your phone and enjoyable.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So y'all are like aware, you're making choices based on like the existing like gotcha game design that like seems
absolutely.
to be like
we're definitely saying we don't want to do that, and we want to be ethical about it. And we will have, like I said, we will have booster packs, but we're doing them from a standpoint of we want to do that. We want to say we're having booster packs because it's fun to open cards.
Yeah.
Not because we're going to do packs so that people will spend X cents per pack, right? We want to say we want packs because people can open them. And obviously there's a financial component like any game there is, but even I'll give you one example. So a lot of mobile games, what they'll do is they'll treat their shop like a puzzle, where they'll say, if you want to spend money, you need to do X conversion rate, and then you're going to have this much change left over. And if you buy this egg, then you're going to have to wait this much to open it. So when we're designing our shop, we're taking the opposite approach. We're saying, yes, if people want to spend money on the game, we want to make it easy for them to do so. And we want to make it crystal clear what you're getting. This is how much money you're spending for this thing. That's it. It's an even number. There's no math in your head about what you need to do. Yeah. There's no leftover. There's no timer of like, you're going to have to wait 5 minutes after clicking this to open it. You don't have to come back the next day to claim it. Right. No, you want to buy some packs because you want more cards. This is how much it is. Buy it and it's yours, and you open it right there. There's nothing confusing about it.
And if I may, there's no like real world analog to these gotcha mechanics with regards to like playing like a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering. Like part of like there is like a pretty pure joy in Magic the Gathering of like, I got a new booster pack. I'm opening my pack. Yeah. Like there's this potential of like, I got to buy all these booster packs. And like we've seen like during the pandemic, like what were you privy to like what was happening with like Pokemon card card game during the pandemic? Like people, Alon, I'm filling this in for Alon and possibly the listeners.
Fill me in because that, I don't know. Yeah.
People started cultivating cottage industries of, and when I say people, it's like influencers, kind of like it's not about playing the card game. It's not
when
about,
they open it on Twitch or whatever.
It's like it's like distilled entertainment version of like gotcha manipulation. And I don't know what I'm saying. I'm on my own soapbox right now, but I think it's heartening to hear what you're saying because it feels like resonant with like the age-old joy of like, it's a card game. I'm opening up my cards. Oh, what cards did I get? Hell yeah! Like that's.
Can you make a strategically fun card game on mobile without touching any of the gotcha mechanics? I believe you can. Our team believes we can, and that's what we've tried to design here.
Yeah, beautiful.
Love that.
Yep.
I mean, that kind of sums it up. I feel like I have a lot of other notes that I could go to, but I feel like you just kind of like tied a bow and put it on. I don't know, Sean. Do you want to get one more thing in or something?
One more thing? I mean, I do kind of want to ask, like, there's two things. There's one thing I want to ask about Million Dreams, which is what is like the creative collaboration process?
Creative specifically around like the character concepts and the art and things like that?
I mean, it could be that specific, but I am wondering just like, no. To be frank, like, no, I'm not. I'm talking about like the creative choices of game like designing the game and like creating the aesthetics of the arts and things like this. But it's like the people who are team members at Million Dreams. Like, what is y'all's collaborative breakdown? Like, what is that process like?
Yeah, so I guess I would say most members of the team, almost all of us are, gamers at heart. We've played tons of card games. We have our favorite games. We have our favorite sets within games. We have our favorite Magic sets that we've drafted. So we're very informed on mechanics and interactions and fun combos, and things that we've enjoyed. So I think we all bring that sort of creativity just off the bat of who we are as gamers to the table when we say, hey, this is what we're looking for. We want to play with this engine. What are some fun things? And, everybody is totally open to give suggestions and thoughts around that from both their analysis, but also just their personal experience. I like this mechanic in Magic. It was super fun. What would that be like in our world? And honestly, a lot of game design, I'm sure a lot of things in the world are like this, but a lot of it is looking around at other things that have worked or that you have found fun. And then how does that work within your engine or within your world? And I think that's very normal. So we do a lot of that too. What was fun in Magic? What was fun in Hearthstone? What was my favorite set that I ever played? And then why? I think a lot of it is digging into the, peeling back the layers. Like, I really liked this set on Magic. Okay. Why did you like that set? Was it the flavor? Was it some of the mechanics? Was it the card? Okay. I liked really this part about it. This gameplay loop was fun. Okay. Well, how could we do a similar gameplay loop in Galaxy? All right. Well, this is how we could do it. And that's how some of our card designs come from. And, we test a lot of card designs. We throw a lot of things at it. We put together a file of tons of card ideas. We go through them as a team, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Probably the hardest question of all, to be honest with you, and this is, I think, with game design in general, and a lot of board game people, I think, could probably learn this too, which is it fun? Is a really difficult question. It sounds like the easiest question in the world. It is very, very hard. You'll come up with 15 ideas, and you'll be like, these ideas are awesome. I just designed the best 15 cards in the world. And then you'll sit down with the team, and you'll kind of walk through it, and you'll play it out in front of you, and you'll be like, is this actually fun? Like, it sounds cool. It might be cool. It might be like different and breaking the rules, but is it fun? And so many times the answer is like, that's actually just not fun. Like, it's really hard to find the fun. Yeah.
I feel like I have like 5 more hours of material to go here, but we're gonna like try and wrap it up at around an hour, because I'm like, oh yeah, like what about balance, and like how do you manage a meta, and like are you gonna, there's so much to go there. But I think where we were gonna try and maybe finish the conversation is just sort of like, so what's next for Once Upon a Galaxy? Like where are you headed towards? What are the next steps you're taking to reach these goals we talked about? Yeah.
So we went to open beta, basically in August here, early August at Gen Con. So basically August 1st was essentially our open beta. This is when anybody can download the game on the app stores. We're just doing kind of a test card file, test collection right now. The art is only 70% done, maybe. We're going to keep rolling that probably till later this year is when we're hoping to do our soft launch. And so soft launch will essentially be, all the art is finished where we're good with the set 1 art. The set 1 card file we'll say is, soft locked. We're good about the cards that are in set 1. Some of the collection mechanics are polished. Some of the store mechanics are in there. Basically, anyone who wants to download the game and play it would play the real game. That's our next checkpoint, basically, is that. So that'll come later this year before the holidays is what we're trying to get that out there. And we're going to call that kind of the soft launch, because we're still going to want to make changes after we get feedback on how that looks. And then we'll say sort of the marketing launch or the public launch will probably be early next year after we make tweaks from feedback in December, January, whatever that is. Make tweaks to that, and then probably launch a full launch, or late winter, early next year, and say, this is the full game. This is the polished game. Everybody can play. And then, more sets coming after that. I will say we have already started some brainstorms of set 2 and set 3. So we already have some.
Well, that's the fun stuff, right?
We have some ideas around that, which is fun. And it's good. It's good to know that ahead of time, because you'll go through the card file of set 1, and there'll be a couple cards that are maybe a little bit too complicated for set 1, or it's like, oh, that's good, but it doesn't really work in this scenario. And you're like, all right, well, that's going to be in set 2. So we already have that file started.
Yeah. Love that.
That sounds like a roadmap. And also, as we're wrapping, I know Alon was trying to wrap it all up down, but I have like a sort of silly question.
You wrap it up.
This is not a wrap up. This is like a tangential, like, what the hell are we talking about? But what's Smee? Who is Smee? Because like a lot of the character designs are like very clearly referencing like public domain things or like folkloric things. But then there's this like suite of characters that keeps appearing with Smee in the name. What is Smee?
Okay, so I guess there's 2 answers to that. So one, Mr. Smee is an open source character. So Mr. Smee is Captain Hook's first mate from Peter Pan. So that's in the original, in the original book, in the original play, as well as
the cute guy with the big bulbous red nose.
So in the original open source Peter Pan, Mr. Smee is Captain Hook's first mate. So that's the story that he's from. Now in our game, he's Despicable Smee. Which is obviously a pun on the minions. So it's Despicable Smee, but it's also kind of his character. So it's a fun little play on that, and you'll see some Easter eggs in the art there. But yeah, we do try to pull from public domain as much as possible. 2 reasons. Obviously, it's faster for us to do that because obviously it takes a lot longer to build your own IP. But even more than that, I think even if we did have more time, we would still go this way. And part of the reason is that resonance, going all the way back to the start of the conversation. We'll take it full circle here. Is
boom.
Resonance is something people have a limited amount of mental energy they can spend on learning a new game. And so when I'm teaching you the rules and I'm teaching you how this game works, if you have to spend 20, 30, 50% of your energy learning this new world or learning these new characters, learning these new types that you don't necessarily know, that's mental energy you're not spending on the gameplay. And we wanted you to get into the gameplay loop as fast as possible and start learning how fun it is to take different cards. So we specifically designed set 1. You'll see more custom characters in set 2, but we specifically designed set 1, and especially the lower level things. So you'll see it more common and uncommon. When you get to epic and legendary, there are some kind of random characters, but common and uncommon is going to be the first 5 hours that you play the game. We want you to resonate. I know who that is. I know who Peter Pan is. I know who this person is. I don't have to spend time thinking and learning all this new IP and this new world. I can get right into it and be like, yeah, this makes sense. If you played the new player experience, if you played the tutorial, we start with the Red Riding Hood. Little Red is trying to go with Big Bad Wolf, because that's something that you don't have to teach anyone. No one has to learn who Red Riding Hood is or why she's going after the wolf. You just
totally, you know.
Yeah. You also know like the types, right? You see a wolf, that's an animal. You see, and that's an animal type. That's a character type. Yeah, it makes sense.
What you just talked through, sort of like. My as goofy as we were being about it, like the fact that my mind seized upon like what's Smee, like me having to use mental energy to process out what Smee is mental energy that I would be spending like learning the mechanics.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's another reason why we one of the core design principles too was to keep the logistics of how to play very standard and very easy. So you notice that all you have to do is drag down. When you select a captain, you drag down. When you pick something, you drag down. When you cast a spell, you drag down. When you select a treasure, you drag down with your finger. We wanted to make that consistent, again, for that mental energy that a 6-year-old can figure out how to play the game because they just have to do this a bunch of times with their finger. If it was some other games are, you swipe down, but then you also have to double click this one. You have to spin this one in a circle, and you have to put this one here and this one on top of it. If there's 7 different ways that I can interact with things, I have to remember all those different interactions. Our game is you swipe down, you make a choice, and you swipe down, and that's all you have to do.
It's intuitive. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. It really is full circle because I'm thinking about all the stuff you started with. I love it. We're obviously going to link to the game in the show notes. Do you want to plug anything, follow you on social media or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll link it there, but galaxy.fun/download is where you should go. I like that URL. We played with a couple different ones, but I think galaxy.fun is a good one.
That's a good one.
No, check it out there. I'll be streaming. I'll send you my Twitch in the show notes as well. I'll probably do some weekly dev stream, something like that. But yeah,
maybe you'll see us in the chat saying, "What's up?"
Absolutely.
What's up, party?
Challenge me.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, yeah, man. Thanks so much for coming on. This was a blast. And we'll see you at the
Absolutely.
Galaxy,
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, guys.